Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Jin, and I am a master's student in chemical engineering at McGill University, and I will be your host for today. Today's conversation aims to highlight how research and citizen action can inspire each other. This recorded conversation is a collaboration between the Climate Reality Project Canada and McGill University. Today we have Grant Clark, Associate Professor in the Department of Bioresource Engineering from McGill University, and Karen Schuett, CEO of Livestock Water Recycling, to discuss why ecological engineering plays an important role in sustainable agriculture, waste reduction, and a circular economy. Climate Reality Project Canada aims to mobilize citizens to gather data according to different indicators to pressure municipalities to work towards UN sustainability objectives. As for McGill University, it has over 200 faculty members from across 35 departments engaged in sustainability research, and over 100 McGill student groups and clubs focus on sustainability, addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that the Climate Reality Project Canada's office and McGill University are located on land which has long served as the site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We recognize and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we are hosting this discussion today. I would now like to invite our first guest, Professor Clark, to tell us how you tell people at parties or other lay people what you do at McGill.
Thanks, Ariel. So as you mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Bioresource Engineering on the McDonald campus of McGill, and I'm the leader of the Ecological Engineering research group there. So my students and I study material flows and energy flows through ecosystems, and we have a focus on agricultural and urban ecosystems. We're interested in managing the flows of organic materials like food and other agricultural products so that our bioeconomy is more circular. So specifically, we're interested in systems and technologies that can help us recycle organic residues back to agricultural soils to enhance soil health and agricultural production.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Professor Clark. And Karen, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you so much. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Livestock Water Recycling. And my company is a little difficult to introduce at a dinner party because we work with manure and we transform manure, we treat it and transform it into fertilizer and clean water. And everyone doesn't want to talk about manure at their dinner party, but just to give you a little insight, we work with protein producers, including hogs and dairy farms, to transform their liquid waste, so that includes manure and other bioliquids, into high-value fertilizers to contribute to the circular economy, and we create an ever-renewable source of recycled clean water. This reduces their greenhouse gas emissions and improves soil and regenerates soil health. As a climate reality volunteer, I am encouraged and inspired to work with a group of like-minded individuals who are focused on helping and healing our planet.
That sounds very inspiring, Karen, and it's great to hear so much wonderful things from what both of you guys are doing with your work.
Thank you.
So, in terms of the research that Professor Clark is exploring with his research group, Karen, could you maybe perhaps give us some examples of how you use such research in your own company?
Sure. Ecological engineering is inherent in our company vision. Everything we do is around improving our ecology with our technology. So this has allowed us to design a true waste to worth value proposition for our farmer clients. The installation of our technology platform not only protects our natural environment, but it does so in such a way that we are creating more value for our customers in the circular economy so that their efforts in sustainability are rewarded with a more profitable business. We always look for ways to innovate, to lower our own carbon footprint and that of our installations. So not only are we reducing waste at the farm level, but we support farms in the transition towards even greater sustainability in their own businesses by being able to engage in a different form of the economy, what we refer to as the circular economy. A big example of how we do this is by using data-driven food systems to increase the transparency and security of our food supply chain.
Professor Clark, is there anything you would like to ask Karen more about her work? Or Karen, if there's anything you'd like to ask Professor Clark about what he does in his work that you're more interested in?
Yeah, I would like to ask Professor Clark,
Pardon me.
what you do around the study of electrical engineering and what, the overview of that is, and how that can be useful for all of us lay people in our work and in our personal lives.
Sure. Well, some of the specific technologies that we're interested in are connecting, as you mentioned, some of the organic wastes that you deal with, like animal manure. Well, our group is also interested in animal manure, but it's an even tougher sell than yours, because the kind of animal that we're talking about are humans. So ultimately, we're talking about recycling human manure from municipal wastewater treatment plants in the form of biosolids and processing those so that they're safe and hygienic to return to agricultural land. So some of the technologies that we're interested in are ones that everyone has probably heard about in the news. So many municipalities are building big composting systems. And as those biosolids pass through the composting system, they're exposed to very high temperatures, since the microbes in the compost release a lot of heat. And that helps to pasteurize the material so that it's safe to take back to agricultural land. We are also looking at anaerobic digestion, which is a way of capturing energy from the organic material before it's recycled. And there are newer technologies as well, which I'm sure, Karen, you're very aware of, such as pyrolysis and so forth. But those are the principal technologies that municipalities are looking at.
Even worse to talk about at a dinner party is human manure, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to talk about that.
My daughters don't even let me talk about that. So Karen, I wonder if you can give us a little bit of insight into the kind of technology that your company designs and markets.
Sure. So our technology kind of lies within all of that you're talking about. We have an on-farm system that works to immediately treat manure at a farm. So rather than have manure sitting in lagoons where it can become harmful to the surrounding waterways and land, it is processed into fertilizer, dry fertilizer, and a concentrated liquid fertilizer, and then clean water immediately at the farm level. So this takes away any greenhouse gas emissions that we would normally see in the storage and land spreading of large amounts of dilute liquid manure. And it also allows for this circular economy to take place, where this processed manure can immediately get out into the market and be sold by the farms. So that's really inherent in our whole practice, is cleaning the water and then creating a healthier soil base for the planet based on using manure in a really proper and appropriate way.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of parallels between what you're saying and what we think about in our lab group. Working on the McDonald campus, of course, we're not only thinking about humans in cities, we're also thinking about the transformation of animal manure into fertilizers and beneficial soil amendments. So I hear what you're saying.
I actually studied some of these technologies back in undergrad, and I was just wondering, in terms of adoption of these technologies, what do you feel like is preventing them from being more widely used? Do you think there are still technological issues with them that have to be resolved before they become more efficient, or do you feel like there's just not much more incentive to use them because what they do right now is, I guess what farms do right now is profitable, and they don't feel like they have to recycle the waste. They could just dump it into the environment.
I'll start off, if you don't mind, Professor Clark, just to talk a little bit about our experience in commercializing this technology. I think really there's a risk involved in using new technology. And if you are a farmer, you want to limit your risk. So you are definitely looking at the best thing for your land. I mean, our farmers are our stewards of our land, and they are, the original environmentalists. So everything they do is trying to improve their land health and their herd health. So they really want to be careful of any risk that could be associated with that. They have margins that they need to maintain in their business. So taking on expensive new technologies that might not create profit for them on their specific farm is a very difficult thing for them to overcome as far as purchasing new things. We really see a lot of support from corporates or from the government trying to help farms so that the whole, food system isn't resting on them taking all the risk and all the, financial and environmental risk on their shoulders. So we do see larger corporate groups or retail groups trying to help, and governments trying to help with subsidies and grants to try and bring this new technology to them so that they can then, adopt, and as they go, become more profitable because of it. Professor Grant, maybe you have some other things to add there.
Sure. I think that the idea of risk is one that's very important. Of course, we know that the agricultural sector is traditionally pretty conservative. And as Karen was saying, you have to really convince a farmer that adopting a new technology or a new practice is going to be beneficial to their business because they are business people at the start, right? But I think it's important to realize that our whole food production system is constantly changing, and farmers have to adapt to that. So the adoption of new technology is one way that they can adapt to new circumstances. And of course, there's the growing population to think about, and the fact that we will need to increase our agricultural production in order to supply the needs of all of those people. The other thing to keep in mind is that we are entering, as a global society, a very risky and dynamic era in the context of not only increased resource demand, but of climate change. And it's very important that we think about how we can produce that extra food that we're going to need using fewer resources and in a more resilient way, so that our food production system is robust in the face of more extreme and variable climate. And so recycling nutrients is one way to do this, because then, as Karen mentioned, we don't have to purchase synthetic nutrients, synthetic fertilizers that are mined from phosphate rock or fixed out of the atmosphere using a lot of energy. We can instead recycle the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that's already in those organic residues, whether it be human manure or other kinds of animal manure. And as we do that, we're also reducing the amount of greenhouse gas that is produced by our agricultural production systems. Not only that, as Karen alluded to, if we're recycling these organic materials back to the soil, increasing the soil organic matter makes the soil healthier and more resilient and more able to withstand changes in climate or rainfall, and better able to produce the crops we need. So the kinds of
and better able to sequester carbon, I was going to add in there, because the healthier soil sequesters more carbon. It's so good what you said about resiliency in our food systems, because we have had to be more resilient with the droughts that we've seen in California. They're on a precipice of a very difficult growing season when they've had such drought-ridden summers. Do you see any other technologies in what you've been talking about, other than, I'm talking about nutrient recycling and organics recycling, but things around pyrolysis and those other technologies that can be helpful for that resiliency in the agriculture system?
Pyrolysis is a technology that's more appropriate, I think, to a municipal waste management system, where it's, there could be waste streams that are not suitable for returning to the soil. However, ideally, if you have a nice, clean, organic material that's not contaminated, for instance, with plastics or heavy metals, as is often the case in a city, if you're dealing with agricultural waste, then it's good to try and retain those complex organic molecules, because they, as you said, build the soil health and increase the soil organic matter in a way that helps the microbial ecology and the rhizosphere and the health of those crops.
Yeah, we call livestock manure nice, clean manure.
Absolutely.
I would like to ask the next question, which is in regards to problems associated with waste reduction, circular economy. What do you feel like we as a society need to do to face the challenges ahead?
Professor Clark, why don't you go first on this one this time?
Sure. Well, I'm going to go back to some of the comments we made earlier. I think what we really need to focus on now as individuals, but also as, as the industrial sectors and even nationally and globally, we really have to focus on moderating and reversing our impact as a species on our planet. And we have to, first of all, try and reduce those impacts, but we also have to make our production systems resilient, because we know that the changes are already happening and they will continue to happen no matter how proactive and aggressive we are in trying to reduce our impact. So we're in for a really bumpy ride. So the big challenges that we face are really global in nature, and we have to respond to those. We're going to be facing warmer temperatures around the globe, more severe weather, including droughts and floods, unseasonable rains that we aren't used to seeing. Beyond that, we're talking about biodiversity collapse, which is happening now. So we're losing the genetic base, that bank account of genetic diversity from which we've built our agricultural systems in the first place. So as that genetic diversity disappears, we lose some of our ability to adapt our crops and animals to different conditions. So that's very important to agriculture as well. We're also looking at decreasing soil quality. Soils around the world are being degraded, and we don't really have any new soils that we can exploit. I mean, there's a little bit of land, marginal soils that we could get if we push down the rest of the Amazon rainforest, but nobody is going there. So we've got a finite amount of soil that we can use to grow our crops. As Karen says, we're capable of producing enough if we can distribute it to satisfy everybody's needs right now. But there is a big problem with soil degradation that we have to look after. And some of the approaches and technologies that we've been talking about can help to address these various issues. But it's going to require a big effort on the part of the whole society to really change the attitude that we have toward food production and the practices that we use to make that food.
Yeah, that's so important to stress there, Professor Clark. A couple of things that you said really touched on points for me, and that whole society discussion is, I think we need to work together to shift towards a global food system where food production and ecosystem protection are linked at every level, from policy to finance to farm practices, the full supply chain. And really, one thing I always say is this is generated by the consumer. The consumer has a lot of power here in looking at what they're buying, looking at what they're spending their money on. That money speaks to food producers to, vote with your dollars, or make your preference known with your dollars, so that we can all work together. One thing about working with the Climate Reality Network has shown me is that there's a global group of people that have this common belief, and we can all speak with our buying power to direct the food system into what we want to see, and what they can work towards. We see, millennials, 74% of millennials want more transparency about the environmental footprint of their food, and they can express that through the dollars that they spend. And, when they spend dollars on that type of food, it supports that food producer to keep working in that direction. So it's really important when we want to talk about, like Professor Clark says, using fewer resources in a resilient way, we need to support those companies that are doing that work.
This seems like such an exciting field of research and work. And I guess I'm wondering, how do you feel like your work is answering these challenges of reducing societal waste and, producing enough food to feed our planet and future population of 10 billion people?
We know that we're living in a water-stressed time and in a climate-changing time. And so feeding the planet in a sustainable and regenerative way is such a passion of ours. One thing I should mention as well, just because, Professor, you brought this up, but around the amount of arable land, one project that we have been working on is growing crops in the desert. We have a project in the Middle East where they didn't normally grow crops on this land because they just didn't have the resource, the water or the fertilizer to make that land proficient at growing feed crops. So they were importing feed crops. Now, when working with their dairy and recycling their nutrients and water, they are able to use that to grow crops on a barren land space that never grew anything before. They're growing fodder for their animals, and the implications of that are significant. You know, growing crops in the desert is a big value proposition for our planet. So we really see things like that as successes that we can enable with a small amount of technology, and it's made us really passionate about our work.
Well, that sounds really exciting. It reminds me of the stories of the Mesopotamians irrigating the desert to grow their crops, but now we're doing it in a new way.
Yeah, yes.
When I was studying at the University of Alberta and later in my graduate studies at McGill, I became more involved in thinking about all of those other millions of large animals that are creating manure, all the people. And what are we doing with that manure? Because the manure and the other kinds of organic waste from cities, you know, the wasted food and so forth, those have been traditionally looked at as a waste management problem by the civil engineers that the city employs. They want to dispose of that material because it has to them no value. Now, if we look at it from the circular economy perspective, what we want to do is to revalorize that material and turn it into a resource. And of course, as we've been discussing, it's full of nutrients, it's full of beneficial organic material that is going to benefit our crop production. So the shift away from a linear economy where products are grown on the farm, shipped to the city, and then the organic material is treated as a waste and disposed of in landfills, through incineration, what have you. That's what we're trying to change. We're trying to bend that economy and bring all those materials back to beneficial use on the farm.
It's so true. You know, my favorite farm that we work with, our farm owner at that dairy farm calls himself an entrepreneur because he's, you know, selling manure where it was traditionally his waste, and what was he going to do with it, and where could he spread it? And, you know, it was this headache. And now he's an entrepreneur because he can sell this. He can use a little bit of technology to create a different type of economy for his farm. And so sell milk and sell manure and, you know, add value into his pocketbook, as well as, you know, looking at this in a circular fashion, like you say.
Yes, I remember taking a field trip back in undergrad where we visited I forgot the name of the reactor, but it was kind of like a fermentation reactor where they took the manure and they made natural gas out of the waste. So, which I thought that must be exactly what some of your clients do here.
Absolutely. And it's really the biggest growth in our market is around renewable natural gas and how farms can access that part of the circular economy as well, you know, creating waste to worth where we can displace traditional oil and gas with renewable natural gas. And so it is a much more climate friendly gas that we can use for transportation. And for homes. So it's really helpful to the planet in that way. Plus it's reusing waste in a way that is helpful for, you know, advantageous for farms. And then we don't have that same waste. We actually have value. So it's valorizing that waste. And then as well, when we do create gas from that waste, I mean, greenhouse gas emissions and everything are reduced, and this has helped, of course, but we retain the nutrients. So after those digesters or fermentation devices, the nutrients are still available to insert into the soil. And so, you know, that circular economy is my favorite way to do an installation where, you know, you've got all the nutrients, you are creating gas value, and you are creating so much economy for the farms. So that's my favorite.
Karen's company is a little bit more advanced and sophisticated in the way they treat that manure, and they're able to separate out those nutrients as more manageable fertilizer products, which is a huge advance. That's one, I think, big barrier to the use of these kinds of materials in agriculture, is that it costs a lot to transport the bulk material back to the field. But if you can pull those nutrients out and concentrate them, then the farmers become much more interested. So I think that's a great innovation on the part of Karen's company.
Thank you so much for saying that. You know, I'm just going to put in a little plug here for anyone. We're hiring. So if anyone's listening, we're hiring in a bunch of different roles, technical and non-technical. So I'm just going to put that out there because we are trying to get more people that are passionate about renewable energy and regenerative production for our planet. And so, you know, if people are listening and they're looking for a place to apply, please do. I just thought I'd throw that out there just as a before we get shut off.
We'll send you some graduates from our program, Karen.
It's great to hear all this wonderful information that both of you have presented. Before I make my closing remarks, I would like to ask, make one last request, and that is if each of you could perhaps summarize the information you presented in today's talk in like a few sentences, like one or two, so our viewers can have a main takeaway from today's conversation.
Sure, go ahead, Professor Clark.
Sure. So I think my perspective on this during this conversation is to remember that humans are animals too. We produce manure along with other organic waste, and it's important that we think about how we can valorize that material so that it benefits not only ourselves in terms of increasing food production, but also benefits the environment by sequestering carbon, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and allowing us to produce more using fewer resources.
And I'm going to just summarize saying one thing about what we're working on right now. We're applying for the Carbon X Prize, the big Elon Musk $100 million prize, and we're using a waste to worth, so manure to value proposal to talk about sequestering carbon, bringing these groups together, human manure and animal manure, and really appropriately using it in a valuable way is going to drastically reduce the carbon in our environment and hopefully win us the Carbon X Prize. I'm just going to put in a little plug here for anyone. We're hiring. So if anyone's listening, we're hiring in a bunch of different roles, technical and non-technical. So I'm just going to put that out there because we are trying to get more people that are passionate about renewable energy and regenerative production for our planet. And so, if people are listening and they're looking for a place to apply, please do. I just thought I'd throw that out there just as a before we get shut off.
We'll send you some graduates from our program, Karen. All right. I'll vote for you, Karen.
Supporting you too in your endeavors. Well, thank you so much, Professor Clark and Karen Schuett, for talking with us today. And it was so useful and informative to hear about what you guys do for your work and research. I hope our listeners enjoyed learning more about the important role ecological engineering plays in sustainable agriculture. To find out more about the sustainability indicators and how to engage with the municipality on sustainability issues, go to climatereality.ca/NCL. That is climatereality.ca/NCL in capital letters. And for more news about what McGill researchers and students are doing on the sustainability front, visit mcgill.ca/MSSI and mcgill.ca/sustainability. Thank you.